This is the story of Alice in Wonderland. Alice was bored. Her sister Ada was absorbed in her book and did not wish to be disturbed. And even though it was a perfect spring day and they were sitting in a lovely meadow next to a rippled stream, Alice could not find a thing to do with herself to keep herself awake. She had tried practicing some of the poems she had to learn for school, but the sunshine had made her tired and lazy feeling, and she could barely remember any words to the one that started, "You are old, Father William." Once or twice she had peeped into the book Ada was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations in it. "What good is a book without any pictures?" asked Alice. Even Alice's cat Dinah was bored. She was considering to herself whether the fun of making a daisy chain would be worth the trouble of getting up and picking the daisies, when suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by her. There was nothing particularly strange about that, and she didn't even think it was too strange when she heard the rabbit say to her in a high, trembly voice, "Excuse me, do you have the time?" "The time for what?" Alice asked. But she changed her mind when the rabbit took a watch out of his waistcoat pocket and looked at it and worried. Oh dear, I shall be too late." He shook the watch and then hurried on. Alice jumped up to her feet in surprise, for it occurred to her that she had never seen a rabbit with either a waistcoat pocket or a watch to take out of it. Burning with curiosity, Alice ran across the field after the rabbit. Chasing rabbits was usually a job for her cat, Dinah, but today Dinah was content just to snooze in the sun. She was just in time to see the rabbit clasp his palms together and dive down into a very large rabbit hole under the hedge. Alice ground to a stop. She knelt by the hole and peered down into the blackness. She considered for a moment what she ought to do. "Well, whatever I find down here has got to be more interesting than a book with no pictures," Alice decided. And the same way you would slide into a swimming pool, she slid herself into the hole, never considering how she might get out again. After the first drop, Alice found herself in a close, dim cavern with a dirt floor that tilted down into darkness. She took a few steps forward in the direction of the slope, but as she moved, the slope became steeper and steeper. She whirled her arms to keep her balance, but as she had to hasten her steps to keep from falling over, she found herself hurtling ever faster down the slope. Suddenly, the floor gave way entirely to a vertical drop, and Alice found herself falling straight down with no ground below her at all. Very long the shaft was, or perhaps Alice fell very slowly, because as she fell she had plenty of time to look around and think. First she tried to look below her, make out what she was coming to, but it was too dark to see. Then she looked at the sides of the tunnel and noticed that they were filled with cupboards and bookshelves. She read the titles of the magazines as she fell. Since she was hungry, she took a jar of orange marmalade from one of the shelves as she passed, but to her disappointment, it was empty. Of course, she didn't want to let go of it for fear of dropping it on someone who might be falling up ahead, so she put it back into another cupboard as she fell past. "After this," Alice said, "falling downstairs will be a breeze. How brave they'll all think me at home. Why, I might decide to fall off the top of the house just for show." But of course she realized this was preposterous. She kept on talking to herself for want of anything better to do. "I must be getting near to the center of the earth by now, at least to Australia," she said. "Poor Dinah, she'll miss me so very much. I do hope someone remembers her saucer of milk." Finally, Alice landed with a thump in a pile of leaves. She looked around, but it was still very dark. She saw a light on at one end of the room, and as she went toward it, she saw the white rabbit skitter past. He sounded rather distraught. "How late it's getting! "Oh, my ears and whiskers!" he said, and then disappeared around the corner. "Oh, Mr. Rabbit!" she called, but he had disappeared again. Around the corner, Alice found herself in a long, low corridor, lit by lamps hanging low from the roof. In the hall there were quite a number of doors, big doors, small doors, doors shaped like triangles, and doors shaped like socks. Alice tried the knob of each one, but they were all locked. Just when she was about to give up, she came upon a little three-legged table all made of glass, and there was nothing on it but a tiny golden key. "Perhaps it belongs to one of the doors," she said. Alice tried the key in all the keyholes. Some keyholes were much too big, and some were much too little, and some were shaped like trumpets and umbrellas and grilled cheese sandwiches, so that you could barely tell that they were keyholes at all. In any case, none of the keyholes fit the key. Alice sighed. She decided to try again, just in case she had jiggled a key that should have joggled. On the second pass, Alice noticed a curtain billowing out from the wall. Behind the curtain was a tiny, tiny door, barely big enough to reach Alice's knee. She knelt down, tried the key in the lock, and sure enough, the door slowly creaked open. Lying down to peep through the door, Alice saw on the other side a beautiful garden full of sunshine, with the splash of cool fountains and big, bright flowers waving in a light breeze. She longed to get out of that dark hall, but she could not get so much as her head through the doorway. "And even if my head would go through," she thought, "it wouldn't be much use without my shoulders. Oh, how I wish I could shut up like a telescope. I think I could, if only I knew how to begin." Alice had seen so many strange things so far that day, she began to feel she was capable of doing any strange thing that popped into her head. She looked back at the table. This time, there was something else on top of it that she hadn't seen before. It was a small brown bottle with a label on it. The label said, "Drink me." Said Alice. "Now, what did Mother say?" "Oh, yes, don't drink anything that's poison." "But it isn't marked poison," she said. She unscrewed the cap and took a big sniff. "And it does smell good." Completely ignoring her mother's warnings, Alice tipped her head back and drank the whole bottle. "Tastes good, too," she said. "Sort of like a combination of cherry tart, custard, pineapple, roast turkey, toffee, and hot buttered toast." She sat down for a moment to savor the lingering taste, but before she knew it, a curious feeling had crept up on her. "I feel like I must be shutting up like a telescope," she exclaimed. And so she was. Soon Alice was only 10 inches tall. She waited to see if she would shrink any further. She felt kind of nervous, for it might end, she thought, in her dwindling down like a burning candle and then going out altogether. But nothing happened for quite a while, and soon she felt confident enough to proceed into the garden. But alas, when she got to the door, she found she had forgotten the little gold key. It was still on top of the table, which was now twice as big as she was. "I never seem to be the right size anymore," she complained. With all her might, she jumped and she jumped for the top of the table, but she couldn't quite reach over the edge to get the key. Then she noticed, under the table, a very small glass box, containing a very small cake. The words "Eat me" were spelled out in currants on the top. Having no better option to consider, Alice decided to take the cake up on its offer. She took a bite, only to discover that it was spice-flavored. "I hate spice," she grimaced, "but if I keep eating it, maybe I'll grow tall enough to reach the key, and if I grow smaller, I can creep under the door, Either way, I'll get out of here and into the garden, so I don't much care which happens." And so she finished it, and then she waited. "Which way? Which way?" she asked, holding her hand over the top of her head to feel which way it was growing. She was annoyed to find that she was still the same size. Of course, that's what usually happens when you eat cake, but so many peculiar things had been happening lately that eating cake without growing or shrinking seemed pretty boring indeed. Just as she finished thinking these thoughts, Alice shot up so tall she clunked her head against the ceiling. "Ouch! Now I'll never get out of here," she whined. "Why did I ever follow that silly rabbit?" And slowly Alice began to cry. She cried until there was a pool of tears all around her, several inches deep and running halfway down the hall. Just then the White Rabbit appeared again. "Oh, I'm late! I'm so late!" he tittered. Alice tried to stop him, but he took one look at her towering size and ran off in fright down the hall, dropping the white gloves and tiny fan he was carrying. Alice went back to crying, fanning herself with the small fan he had left, because it was getting very hot in the hall. Her tears poured down like rain. Before she knew it, the pool of tears came up to her waist. "I must be shrinking again," she thought, and at once it came to her that it was caused by the fan she was carrying. Quickly she dropped it before she dwindled away altogether. "How curious everything is today, and yesterday things went on just as usual. I wonder if I've been changed in the night," said Alice. "But if I'm not the same, who am I? How puzzling it all is." Alice decided to try reciting Father William again to see if she knew the words any better this time. She folded her hands in her lap, just as she had been taught, and began. "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair has become very white. And yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right?" "In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain. But now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again." "Somehow I don't think that's quite right," said Alice. "It seemed ever so much more serious when we recited it in school." And all the time she was reciting, she didn't notice that the tears had come up to her chin. "Oh, I must have shrunk again," she declared, taking a few doggy paddle strokes to stay afloat. "But I'm even smaller than before," she said, and commenced crying for help. From behind her she heard someone else swimming around behind her and humming a little tune. "Who's there?" she asked, looking around. It was a mouse doing the backstroke. "Oh, Mouse," Alice called, "if you can talk, can you tell me the way out of this pool? I'm so very lost." But the mouse just gave her a puzzled look. "Perhaps he doesn't speak English," thought Alice. "I wonder if he speaks French." She was only up to the first lesson in French class, but she was eager to practice on a real, live French-speaking mouse. Let's see, what did we learn last week? Oh, I remember. "Bonjour, monsieur. Où est ma chatte?" "Eek!" cried the mouse. He dove in fright beneath the surface. "Oh, dear, I didn't mean to frighten you. I do apologize. Please don't run away," said Alice as the mouse came up, gulping for air. She didn't realize that she had just told the mouse she was looking for her cat. "But the cat, she will eat me, yes?" ventured the mouse. "No, she won't," retorted Alice. "I'm sure you would like Dinah very much. She is such a dear." "I despise the cats and the dogs too," snapped the mouse. "But if you could only meet Dinah, I'm sure you would change your mind. Why, she sits purring by the fire so nicely, licking her paws and washing her face, and she has such beautiful long fur, and she's such a nice, soft thing to hold, and she's terrific at catching mice."
"Sacre bleu!"
exclaimed the mouse, diving under the surface again to hide. But Alice's attention was elsewhere, for a great many creatures had begun to drop into the pool, among them an eaglet, a pelican, a duck, an owl, a dodo bird, and a parrot named Laurie. "Who are all these creatures?" said Alice.
"Who are you is the better question. We know who we are,"
said the mouse, and with that all the creatures swam away. Alice swam after them, and soon enough they reached the shore. "I never in all my days imagined I'd be insulted by a mouse," sniffed Alice. On the shore all the creatures were fluttering their wings, drying off. "Ick!" said Alice. "How shall we ever get dry? We'll catch our death if we don't, my mother says."
My mother says,
said Laurie the parrot, and not in a nice tone of voice. Alice didn't like being mimicked at all. "I said that?" Alice cried.
I said that,
cried the bird. "Don't mimic me," said Alice, trying to get her point across.
"Don't mimic me,"
said Laurie, missing the point altogether.
"Shh, taisez-vous, stupide,"
shushed the mouse, stepping between them.
"Soon you shall be as dry as the French lesson book, eh?"
"I know we'll have a caucus race,"
said the dodo. The animals began flapping and honking excitedly. "What's a caucus race?" asked Alice.
"Politicians do it all the time," said the dodo. "That's when we run and run and run against each other. When the politicians do it, they just get drier and drier and drier."
They advanced to the course. Alice looked at it, puzzled. "Why, there aren't any lanes or markers, and there's no finish line to tell when you've won," remarked Alice. "How does—" But the bang of the starting gun cut her off. The animals hooted and flapped wildly and took off in all directions. Alice strove to keep up. They ran and ran and ran, and soon enough the race was over and Alice found herself dry but alone. Where is everybody?" she panted. "Look, there's that rabbit again." The rabbit came across the field, running and worrying and running. "Oh, my dear paws! Oh, my fur and whiskers! I'll never get there in time," worried the rabbit. "Mr. Rabbit, sir," called Alice, her hands on her hips. She was beginning to get quite annoyed. "Mr. Rabbit, I need your help. I do need to get moving." "Don't we all, my dear, don't we all?" he called, without so much as a glance in her direction as he ran down the field, out of sight. "He really is rude for a rabbit," said Alice, but she consoled herself by walking down the lonely forest path that had opened up in front of her. "If I ever catch that rabbit, I'll teach him something about manners. Don't think I won't," Alice thought to herself. Soon Alice came upon a small house, neatly painted white. She was sure she had found him, for above the door was a small sign saying, "W. Rabbit." Alice knocked. "Mr. Rabbit," said Alice. There was no reply. She knocked again. "Mr. Rabbit," she called, but in response to her knocking, the door swung open on its own, and so she felt obliged to go inside. "Are you here?" she asked. Inside the house was quite charming, decorated in the Tudor style with lace tablecloths and Victorian paintings of a great many rabbit ancestors, all dressed up in elaborate costumes, with starched ruffles and ornate jackets and hats with great white plumes upon them. A beautiful glass chandelier hung from the ceiling, and a lovely grand piano stood against the wall. Looking around, Alice saw, on a glass table just like the one in the Hall of Doors, a little bottle, just like the one she drank. "Perhaps this will make me grow large again," said Alice, "for I am quite tired of being such a tiny little thing." She unscrewed the cap and drank the bottle down. Immediately she began to feel strange. "Uh-oh," she said, for she felt herself stretching again, and she was getting quite accustomed to the symptoms of it, and wondered if there was something she could do about it. "Stop it," she told herself crossly. "That's quite large enough, I should think." But herself cared not a whit for Alice's opinion, and kept right on growing. Soon Alice was so big the sides of the room squeezed in upon her. The piano pressed uncomfortably into her side, making unpleasant crashes on the keyboard as she moved, and the chandelier was gouging into her neck. "Oh, too big!" she said, as she struggled to move the heavy limbs that were shoved so strangely against the furniture. In order to get at all comfortable, she had to stick her arm out the window, and her foot was thrust up the chimney. "What will become of me now?" she cried, but stopped herself before she worsened her predicament with another, possibly lethal, flood of tears. Of course, the White Rabbit chose just that moment to come running along. "Goodness gracious, what's that in my window?" the rabbit gasped. With him was a frog named Pat. "It appears to be an arm, your honor," said the frog, who spoke with a thick brogue. "An arm, you idiot!" cried the rabbit. "What would an arm be doing in my window? It doesn't follow my decorating scheme at all." Just then Alice's hand came sweeping toward them. The two creatures screamed for their lives. "It's an arm, all right," the rabbit decided, "and it's got no business in my house. I'm getting rid of it this minute. Grab a finger, Pat. We'll pull this thing out." The rabbit and the frog pulled on Alice's arm, but they couldn't budge it, and Alice didn't approve of this at all. "Ouch! Hey! You can't remove that arm. It's attached to me," she boomed in her big-as-a-house voice. "Well, I don't like it," sniffed the rabbit. "It obstructs the view, and it doesn't match the curtains. We are going to get rid of it, no matter what your opinion is. Pat, grab that noose and fling it over the wrist. Then pull, man, pull." "Ow!" said Alice, for it hurt quite a bit. "Do they intend to pull my arm right off?" she realized. But their pulling made room for the cabinet to open, and inside the cabinet were some little cakes, like the ones she had just eaten. "Perhaps they will make me smaller," thought Alice. "And in any case, if I get any bigger, I shall explode the house, and that, at least, shall save my arm." With all her might, she stretched her little pink tongue over to the cabinet, and slurp! "One good pull ought to do it, Pat," said the rabbit. "1," he counted. "2. Oh, it's working!" cried Alice to herself. 3, shouted the White Rabbit, and with a mighty pull, Alice came tumbling, whole out, through the window with a major crash, pop, bang, and tinkle, tinkle. "Oh, my goodness! It isn't an arm at all," said the rabbit. "It's a whole girl." "Indeed it is," said Alice, indignant, "and one who doesn't appreciate having her arm pulled off just because it doesn't fit your decorating scheme. On top of that, you were entirely rude when I asked for your assistance." Alice was quite prepared to launch into the tirade she had planned, but by then the rabbit and the frog had run off, and Alice was left lecturing the breeze. "These woodland creatures," she clucked, "always disappearing." Idly rubbing her hurt wrist, she walked off into the forest, but it was not the sort of forest she remembered. The forest she was used to had rocks and squirrels and lovely trees. In this forest, the flowers were as big as trees, the blades of grass as big as Alice, and the ants as big as Dinah. Then she remembered that she was about 3 inches tall, which made the view seem a bit more normal.
I wonder how I shall ever grow up properly if I am to get smaller and smaller every time I eat anything," Alice said. She came upon a mushroom about her size. She looked under it, on both sides of it, and behind it, and it occurred to her that she might as well look and see what was on top of it, too. She stretched herself on tiptoe and peeped over the edge, and her eyes met those of a large blue caterpillar sucking on a striped yellow and purple straw. He gave a good noisy slurp and then looked at her gravely, blinking his big blue eyes. "Who are you?" the caterpillar demanded. "Well, I'm not exactly sure at present," Alice replied. "This morning I was Alice, but then I've changed several times since then. I'm rather confused, you see." But the caterpillar didn't see. "And what is so confusing about that?" he bristled. Alice didn't have a ready answer. It's just confusing, that's all," she confessed. "It is not," said the caterpillar. "It is perfectly, utterly, dreadfully normal." "Well, I expect you'll feel quite differently when you wake up one day and find yourself a butterfly," retorted Alice. "Then what will you do?" The caterpillar took a long draw on his straw and haughtily replied, "I expect that, unlike you, I'll adapt. Come up here. I've something to ask you," he said suddenly. Alice pulled herself up on the mushroom, standing at full height. She was the same size as the caterpillar. "Tell me," he said, "how do you like being 3 inches tall?" "Well, I should like to be a little larger," said Alice. 3 inches is such a wretched height." "To the contrary," shouted the caterpillar, 3 inches is an excellent height indeed. Why, my ancestors—" "Oh, my, I didn't mean to offend you," cried Alice in shock. All the creatures she met today were so easily offended. "Yet you have," said the caterpillar. "But if 3 inches isn't good enough for the likeness of you, you can change your height just by eating from this mushroom. One side makes you grow taller," he said, "and the other side makes you small. Now go straighten yourself out and allow me to finish my lemonade in peace." He sniffed and took such a slurp on his lemonade that Alice was quite certain she had been dismissed. "Now, let's see," she said, descending the mushroom. She stretched her arms around it and broke off a piece from each side. "One side makes you larger, and the other side makes you small. I've got a piece of each, but which is which?" "Eeny, meeny, miny, mo," she said, weighing the pieces up and down in her hands. When the rhyme was over, she picked the left side piece and sprouted up so large that her head brushed the tips of the treetops, causing a neighboring pigeon a great deal of alarm in thinking that Alice's head and neck was a snake come to eat her babies. She couldn't convince the pigeon to the contrary, and the pigeon looked ready to give her a good peck in the nose. But groping her way up her neck with her faraway hand, Alice ate some of the right side, and immediately shrunk so that her chin was stuck tight against the tops of her shoes. She had just enough room to squeeze another piece of mushroom into her mouth. She alternated the pieces, first growing a little, then shrinking, then growing again, until she became the right height. "Perfect," said Alice. "Now, if only I knew which way to go from here." "That depends entirely on where you want to go," answered a strange voice from above. Alice looked up to find a Cheshire Cat perched on the bough of a tree overhead. It had lots of teeth, and it was grinning so devilishly that you could see each and every one of them. Alice approached the cat. "I don't much care where," she said. "Then it doesn't matter which way you walk," interrupted the cat. "As long as it's somewhere," finished Alice. "Oh, you'll get somewhere all right if you walk far enough," said the cat. "What sort of people live around here, Cheshire Puss, if you don't mind me calling you that?" asked Alice. But it seems she had misplaced him, for he was no longer sitting on the branch above. "Mostly crazy ones," came the reply from the tree 2 trees over, where the cat had reappeared in a flash. "In this direction lives the Mad Hatter," said the cat, disappearing, then reappearing in the first tree. "And in that direction lives the March Hare. Visit either. They're both crazy," he said. "But I don't know if I want to go among crazy people," said Alice. "We're all crazy here," said the cat. "I know I'm crazy." "How are you crazy?" asked Alice. She was fairly certain she knew, but she didn't want to offend the cat by taking him at his word. "Well, you figure that dogs aren't crazy, right?" he suggested. Alice agreed. "Well, a dog growls when he's angry and wags his tail when he's happy," said the cat. "Now, I growl when I'm happy and wag my tail when I'm angry. Therefore, I'm crazy." He sat back and grinned some more. "I call that purring, not growling," said Alice. "You can call it whatever you want," he said. "You're crazy too." "I am not crazy," protested Alice. "Well, you must be," said the cat, "or you wouldn't be here." And with that, the Cheshire Cat faded out altogether, except for his grin, which stayed. "I do wish you wouldn't disappear like that," Alice said. "Those teeth are awfully scary." The Cheshire Cat zipped back in to make a reply. "Oh, but it's so much fun," he said. "And it's not nearly as easy as it looks. Tell me, are you playing croquet with the Queen today?" "I should like it very much," said Alice. "I do adore croquet, but I haven't been invited." "Oh, you will be," said the cat. "See you there." He zipped back out and did not reappear. Alice giggled. "I must say, I've often seen a cat without a grin, but never a grin without a cat," she said. "That's the most curious thing I ever saw in my whole entire life. Now then, I've seen hatters before, so the March Hare will be much more interesting. And since this is May, it won't be as raving mad as it was in March. I shouldn't think." She turned and marched in the direction of the hare. Outside the March Hare's house, which had 2 chimneys like rabbit ears and a thatch of fur in between, there was a long table covered in a white tablecloth with many places set for tea. The Mad Hatter sat at one end wearing a huge top hat. Next to him sat the March Hare in a bow tie and waistcoat. Between them lay the Dormouse, showing very poor manners by falling sound asleep and snoring loudly all over the fine china. But apparently the Hatter and Hare could not care less about table manners. As they buttered their toast, they rested their elbows directly on top of the Dormouse and carried on with their argument. "You should say what you mean, you know," chided the Mad Hatter. "I do," said the March Hare. "At least as much as I seen what I may. I mean what I say. Same thing." "It is not the same thing," said the Hatter. "Not a bit. You might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same as I eat what I see, or that I like what I get is the same as I get what I like. It's not." He pounded his fist on the table with this last pronouncement, juggling the Dormouse awake. The Dormouse blinked his eyes and added, "Or that I breathe when I sleep is the same as I sleep when I breathe." "It is the same with you," bellowed the Hare. "But the pass the butter." "Perhaps they'll be kind enough to direct me home," thought Alice as she came up to the table. She didn't want to frighten them as she had frightened the mouse, so she took a nibble of the right side of the mushroom to shrink to the Hatter's size. Gathering her courage, she faced the table. "Pardon me," she said, "but—" Go away, no room, room," cried the Hare and the Hatter together. "But there's plenty of room," protested Alice. The Mad Hatter took a second look at the table. So there is, he said. "Do sit down." After a moment's consideration, he asked, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" Alice, who loved riddles, said she was sure she could guess that one. "Do you mean you think you can find out the answer to it?" asked the March Hare. "Find out the answer?" "Exactly so," said Alice. "Then you should say what you mean," cried the Mad Hatter. "I do wish you would offer me some tea," said Alice. But no one did. The Dormouse fell back to sleep, his head hitting the table with a terrible thud. "What day of the month is it?" asked the Hatter, opening a vast shiny pocket watch. "The 4th, I believe," said Alice. The Hatter sighed. "2 days wrong," he said to the March Hare. "I told you butter wasn't the thing to fix it with." "But it was the best butter," said the Hare. "Yes, but some crumbs must have got in as well," said the Hatter. "You shouldn't have put it in with the bread knife." "What a funny watch," said Alice. "It tells the day of the month, but not what time of day it is." The Mad Hatter dangled the watch by the chain and dunked it in his teacup. "Why should it?" said he. "Does your watch tell you what year it is?" The Dormouse interrupted the discussion with his terrible snores. The March Hare sighed. "The Snoremouse is deep again. What's lake him up?" He dribbled some tea onto the Dormouse's nose, and the Dormouse blinked awake. Yes, exactly," he said. "I was just going to say that myself." "Rid you des the ganser to the Yuddlemet?" asked the March Hare. "I'm sorry, I've quite forgotten the riddle," said Alice. "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" the Hatter asked, exasperated. "I don't know," said Alice. "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" "I haven't the slightest idea," said the Hatter. "Pass the butter." "Pass the butter," echoed the March Hare. Added the Dormouse. "Here's the butter, said Alice in a hurry. "I think you might do something better with your time than wasting it by asking riddles that have no answers." "How great you are," said the March Hare. "Let us draw instead." He dumped a bucket full of crayons onto the desk, waking up the Dormouse. "I don't know about you, but we learned to draw in school. They taught us drawing and stretching and fainting in coils. For now, let's draw things that begin with the letter M." "The letter M?" asked Alice. The Dormouse began to draw. "Like mousetrap," he said. "And mayonnaise," said Alice. "You forgot much," said the Hatter. "But have you ever seen a drawing of muchness?" said Alice. "I really don't think." "And if you don't think, then you shouldn't talk," corrected the March Hare. "And if you can't speak nicely to me, then don't speak to me at all," retorted Alice. The Dormouse's head fell against the table, and once again he was fast asleep. "This is the stupidest tea party I've ever been to," said Alice. "Why, thank you," said the Mad Hatter. "We do try our best." The rabbit chose that moment to cross their path. "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear! It's nearly begun. Oh dear!" he worried. "Mr. Rabbit, wait!" called Alice. But the rabbit paid her no mind. He opened a round door on the trunk of a nearby tree and went right inside. "Things get curiouser and curiouser," said Alice, following him. Descending the stairs in the tree, she found herself in the same hall of doors as before. "I shall do it properly this time," she told herself. "First, get the key from the table. Then become the right size with the mushroom." She smiled to herself. "I'm getting good at this," she said. With great confidence, she fit the key in the lock and descended into the garden, which was just as beautiful as promised. A large rose tree stood near the entrance of the garden. The roses growing on it were white, but there were 3 gardeners perched all over it, busily painting them red. Alice thought this was odd. Wouldn't it be much simpler just to grow a red rose tree than to repaint each bud by hand? If that weren't strange enough, each of the gardeners was shaped like a playing card. The 3, 5, and 7 of hearts. Alice went nearer to listen. "Watch it, 5," said the 3 of hearts. "You're getting paint all over me."
I couldn't help it, said 5, in a sulky tone of voice. 7 hit my elbow.
"That's right, 5," said 7. "Always blame somebody else."
You better not talk, said 5. I've heard the Queen say only yesterday that you deserved to be beheaded.
"What for?"
said 7. That's none of your business, said 5.
"It is too my business," said 7. "It's my head, isn't it?"
All right, I'll tell you then, said 5. It was for bringing the cook tulip bulbs instead of onions yesterday.
"That's totally unfair," complained 7. "And besides, they tasted just as good." He turned around to make a theatrical gesture when his eye chanced to fall on Alice. As she stood watching them, he stopped and nudged the others, and all 3 cards jumped down from the tree and bowed low for her inspection. "Would you tell me why you're painting those roses?" asked Alice rather timidly. "Well, you see, miss," said 7, "this should have been a red rose tree, but we planted a white one by mistake, and if the Queen were to find out, we should all have our heads cut off." "Isn't that a little harsh?" asked Alice. But the herald's trumpet announcing the Queen's arrival drowned her out. Suddenly, all 3 cards stood up screaming in unison, "The Queen! The Queen!" and fearing for their heads. They threw themselves face down on the ground so they couldn't be recognized. The Queen's band played a brassy, pompous procession full of trumpets and trombones. First in the parade came the soldiers, and they were all shaped like the 3 gardeners, oblong and flat, with their hands and feet at the corners. Next came the 10 courtiers. These were ornamented all over with diamonds and walked 2 by 2, as the soldiers did. Next came the royal children, jumping merrily in couples, 2 by 2, all ornamented with hearts. The White Rabbit followed them, along with an assortment of party guests, and last of all came Their Highness, the King and Queen of Hearts. The Queen was wide and she was loud. She wore a long patterned caftan and a very sour expression.
Stop! Stop everything!
she shouted as she passed in front of Alice.
This is getting to look like the parade for that dreadful Queen of Diamonds, complained the Queen. Find out whoever organized it and cut off his head.
Right, Your Highness, answered 2 soldiers in unison. As the soldiers scurried off to do the Queen's bidding, the Queen noticed Alice, who had been standing under the red rose tree, minding her own business.
Hello, child, she said sweetly. I've never seen you here before. What's your name?
Alice, Your Highness, Alice replied.
Alice, Alice. Oh, yes, Alice. I believe we met at the Jack of Clubs banquet, said the Queen. Why, I remember. I was having lunch with him just the other day. I said, Jackie? All his friends call him Jackie. Who was that delightful little girl at your party? And he said,
"But, Your Highness," interrupted Alice, "I'm sure we've never met before. I only just now came down the rabbit hole. I don't even know the Jack of Clubs." The Queen stepped back, eyebrows raised.
"You don't know the Jack of Clubs?" she repeated. "You're not the Alice from the Jack of Clubs? Party crasher?"
The Queen yelled,
"Off with her head!" "My dear, consider, she is only a child,"
begged the King. The Queen cocked her head and after a moment's thought smiled a saccharine smile and gave Alice a pat on the cheek, rather a hard pat.
So true, said the Queen. "Tell me, dear, do you play croquet?"
"I adore croquet," said Alice.
"Come then, join our game,"
cooed the Queen. The music resumed and Alice joined the procession. Now that Alice was an important person, the White Rabbit sidled up to her for some conversation. It's a very fine day, don't you think?" said the Rabbit, all timid and stuttering. "Very," said Alice, "except that the Queen is so dreadfully fond of beheading people, it's a wonder there is anyone left at all." "Shh! She'll hear you, and we'll both lose our heads," whispered the Rabbit. A short while later, the players had all lined up at the croquet green. The soldiers had all bent over double to make the wickets, while the hedgehogs had rolled themselves up into croquet balls. All the guests grabbed their pink flamingos and began swinging them at the hedgehogs. And then, if they were in the mood, the hedgehogs would roll under the wicket cards toward which they had been propelled. "This is the strangest game I've ever seen," Alice said. Alice had a hard time managing her flamingo. She got his body tucked away comfortably enough under her arms, with his legs hanging down. But just as she was about to give the hedgehog a blow with the flamingo's head, the flamingo twisted itself around and looked up in Alice's face with such a puzzled expression that she could not help bursting out laughing. By the time she had got his head down to begin again, she was annoyed to find that the hedgehog had unrolled himself and was in the act of crawling away. Just then she saw the Cheshire Cat's grin hovering by itself above the trees. "How's it going?" the grin asked. "I don't think they play at all fairly," said Alice. "There are no rules, and if there are, nobody attends to them." "You like the Queen?" he asked. "Not at all," Alice replied crossly. "She's so extremely—" Just then the King and Queen drew up behind them. "Likely to win," Alice said. "That it's hardly worthwhile finishing the game." The Queen smiled and passed on, but the King stopped and looked askance. "Who's that you're talking to?" he asked. "It's a friend of mine, a Cheshire Cat," said Alice. "I don't like the look of it," said the King. "It must be removed at once. Oh, Queen!" In the distance the Queen could be heard to yell, "Off with his head!" And off his head would have been if the executioner had not refused to do the job. "Your Highness," he said, "you can't cut off a head unless there's a body to cut it off from. And this cat doesn't even have a full head. He appears to be nothing but a grin. I can't behead him, and I can't very well begrin him, can I?" "You could begin to begrin," suggested the White Rabbit, but the Queen stepped in.
"You dare challenge me?"
the Queen asked the executioner.
"Off with your head!"
"But dear," said the King, "who shall execute the executioner?" Just then the herald's trumpet sounded.
"The trial's beginning,"
proclaimed the herald.
"All stand for the trial."
Before long, Alice and all the guests were settled in the stands. The 12 jury members were seated in the jury box, and the King and Queen squeezed together in the judge's seat.
"Read the accusation,"
commanded the Queen. The White Rabbit hopped up to the stand. He cleared his throat and then recited, "The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer's day. The knave of hearts, he stole those tarts and took them quite away.
I did not,
squealed the knave, chained up in a cage at one end of the courtroom.
Jury, consider your verdict,
The queen ordered.
But it's not, time for that yet, Your Highness,
Put in the White Rabbit.
There's usually a great deal to come first.
All right, then, call the first witness,
said the queen. The first witness was the Mad Hatter, who came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other.
I beg your pardon, Your Majesty, but I hadn't quite finished my tea when you called,
said the Hatter.
When did you begin?
Asked the queen.
14th of March, I think it was,
the Hatter said.
It was the 15th,
yelled the March Hare.
16th,
added the Dormouse.
Write that down,
commanded the queen. The jurors eagerly wrote down all 3 dates, added them up, and multiplied it by 17, and reduced the answer to dollars and cents. Just at this moment, Alice felt a very curious sensation, which puzzled her until she made out what it was. She was beginning to grow again.
Hey, leave room for me,
whined the Dormouse, who had the misfortune of sitting next to Alice on the bench.
The next witness is Alice. Please take the stand,
said the queen.
Me?
said Alice, for she was quite certain she knew nothing whatsoever about the business of the trial. She rose to take the stand, but by this time she was so large that she caught the hem of her dress on the jury box and tumbled it quite over.
Oh, I beg your pardon,
she said to the jurors lying in disarray.
Tell the court, Alice,
said the queen.
What do you know about this business?
Nothing,
said Alice.
Nothing whatsoever?
asked the queen.
Nothing whatsoever,
confirmed Alice. That's very important, pronounced the king.
Unimportant, Your Majesty means,
respectfully suggested the White Rabbit. The king shrugged. Important, unimportant, important, unimportant. Can't see the difference it makes, he said.
Silence,
the queen decreed.
Rule 42. All persons more than a mile high to leave the court.
Everyone looked at Alice.
But I'm not a mile high,
Alice protested.
Yes, you are. Nearly 2 miles,
insisted the queen. Aware of her superior size, Alice was feeling quite haughty by this time.
I shan't go,
she declared.
It's not a regular rule. You just invented it.
It's the oldest rule in the book,
said the queen.
Then it ought to be number 1,
said Alice.
Off with her head,
ordered the queen, who knew but one way to handle a crisis. Wait, my dear, offered the king, for the jury to consider the verdict. Then we can execute everybody at once.
But there's one more bit of evidence,
said the White Rabbit.
We just found this paper. It seems to be a letter from the prisoner to somebody.
It must be that, said the king, unless it was written to nobody, which isn't usual, you know.
Why, it isn't even a letter,
said the rabbit.
It's a set of verses.
Please, Your Majesty, I didn't write it, wailed the knave. You can't prove I did. There's no name signed at the end. Then you must have meant some mischief, said the queen. Or else you'd have signed your name like an honest man. Let it be read before the court.
The White Rabbit looked it over for a few moments.
I can't, Your Majesty,
said the rabbit.
It's all nonsense, except the last bit.
A secret kept from all the rest between yourself and me.
Ah, there you are. Let the jury consider the verdict, said the king. No, no, sentence first, verdict afterward, insisted the queen.
The king grabbed the paper. Look, dear, he said to the queen. The verse also says, before she had this fit,
Now you don't have any fits, do you, my sweet?
the king asked.
Fits? asked the queen. Fits? Me?
She hurled an inkstand at the rabbit.
Libel, slander, insubordination, she yelled. Off with his head!
But it goes on, the king read as the soldiers led the very flustered white rabbit away.
It says, they all returned from him to you.
And there they are, said Alice, for the tarts had materialized on the table at the king's foot.
The tarts are found, cried the king. Jury, consider the verdict. No, the sentence first, argued the queen.
That's ridiculous, said Alice, for she had had all she could stand of the queen.
Oh, ridiculous, is it?
retorted the queen, for she had had all she could stand of Alice.
Off with her head,
she yelled. But nobody dared make a move on Alice, who by now had grown to her full height and towered over the cards like a skyscraper. Who cares for you? You're nothing but a pack of cards, said Alice, and with that the whole pack flew up into the air and came raining down upon her. Alice cried out. She shielded her face with her hands and soon found herself lying on the blanket next to the stream, with her head in the lap of her sister, who was gently brushing away some dead leaves that had fluttered down from the trees upon her face.
Wake up, Alice, dear,
Ada said. What a long sleep you've had. Oh, I've had such a curious dream, said Alice, wishing to tell her sister. Let us go to tea, dear, and you can tell me all about it on the way, said Ada. As the two walked off, both were so caught up in Alice's story that they forgot all about Dinah, Alice's cat. But Dinah didn't mind, for she was having tea herself at the edge of the blanket, by the side of the stream, with all the fantastic creatures from Wonderland. The end.